When my daughter started kindergarten, our morning routine would start out nice and smoothly. Her alarm would go off, we'd ease her out of bed, she'd eat breakfast and brush her teeth. But inevitably, by the time 7:30 in the morning rolled around, part of me would start itching with a mounting sense of urgency. As I saw the minutes ticking by toward our 7:45 departure time to make it to school on time, hearing her singing casually to herself while she wandered around her room with just tights on, I could feel this pushy part of me, a rushy-bushy part, as my daughter would call it, start to take over my brain and body. Within a handful of seconds, I would turn from this calm, present, connected, loving mom into a pushy, stressed out, contracted, tunnel-visioned, efficiency above all else beast. It was like being body snatched. I would get all stressed out and hound her to get moving, and of course, the more I rushed her, the more agitated and resistant she would get, which would make me feel like I had to push harder, and by the time we'd get to the bottom of the stairs, we'd be rushing to put her shoes on, we'd both feel mad, she would sometimes be in tears, and we would run to school, deposit her in her class line, with both of us feeling terrible and disconnected. And the comical thing was, we live a block from school, and it's not a big deal in the slightest to roll into clap in a few minutes after the bell. So there was truly no harm or risk in reality. The sense of urgency that would arise within me, though, was completely disproportionate to the circumstances of the actual present moment. But that felt sense of needing to rush and push us forward in this urgent way, it felt absolutely real and dire pulsing through my body. It literally felt like a life or death internal response that I really couldn't control, despite the fact that there was no actual threat in reality. And as the days wore on, this rushed morning rhythm, salt would start to be poured into the wound by my nervous system, because it would start to brace in anticipation of having to go into this bad guy mode, this rushy mode. And my system would start the subtle background revving as soon as I would wake up in the morning, which meant mild stress would seep into the breakfast and the lunch making process, into my early interactions in the morning with my daughter too. And as the months rolled on, that first year of elementary school, this pattern became really painful, and it became abundantly clear that this was not sustainable. And it certainly wasn't the way that I wanted to be with my amazing little child, who I felt so incredibly connected with when I'm not in my stress response. But at first, even after I really saw how painful this pattern was and wanted to change it, I actually couldn't stop that rushing part from taking over within me. I could feel the rushing energy surge, notice that the force of it felt disproportional to the reality of the situation, but awareness and willpower alone really weren't enough to change the pattern initially. It was clear that this pattern had really deep roots within me, and it wasn't until I started really diving into deeper layers of personal nervous system work and inner parts work that I was able to gradually soften this rushing pattern. And this is how these patterns often reveal themselves. We come across, as IFS, or Internal Family Systems creator Dick Schwartz refers to them, as to trailheads, a pattern painful enough to really capture our attention, in which when we're willing to really tune into it and get curious about it, it can point us down a path of exploration that leads us to some potent integration or healing of something that had been below our level of conscious awareness until now. And that's definitely what this rushing pattern did for me. And I'm guessing that you likely recognize some of this unnecessary rushing pattern in your own life. So why do we rush even when we don't need to? Why do our brain and nervous system convince us that we need to race through things that we don't actually need to race through? From our autonomic nervous system's ancient, brilliant but primitive perspective, our nervous system kicks into this sympathetic state of hyperarousal activation, rushing, fear, panic, urgency, worry, when it perceives some threat on the horizon so grave that it thinks we literally might die from it. And this is the mode that you've likely heard referred to as fight or flight, that part of our nervous system. And it's actually a lot more nuanced than that, but for now, we'll kind of just roll with this as it is. So while not super helpful on the getting out the door peacefully on a basic Monday morning front, this urgency-driven pattern actually makes complete sense from an evolutionary perspective. Our nervous system is constantly scanning the landscape around and within us for signals of safety or danger. And when the terrain appears danger-free, our nervous system relaxes and rests at our sides. But when a threat is detected, even the slightest whiff of a possible threat, our system activates into protective mode. Our brain and body coordinate with the message. There is a threat coming our way. Quick, get it together. We've got to be ready to move. We've got to be ready to take action. And this sympathetic mode is mobilizing, activating energy. So this rushing with urgency mode is a protective adaptation. But the thing is, our nervous system predicts current danger based on past experience. So if little me learned early on and often in my family of origin that rushing or pushing forward in a myopically fixated, contracted way was necessary in order to stay safe, good, connected, successful, acceptable, lovable, then my system is absolutely not going to dial that rushing habit down without a fight, regardless of whether or not this present moment actually calls for that level of old activation energy, habitual energy. And our nervous system won't stop rushing and pushing until it truly understands that we can move more gently, more fluidly, yes, even more slowly, and still be okay, still get the important things in our life done effectively. And then on top of the physiological aspects of this urgency mode, we also have young parts of ourselves who have extremely wisely devised protective strategies to mitigate potential catastrophes they want to protect us from. And those parts within us will do whatever they deem necessary to prevent painful things from our past from happening again in the present or in the future. Experiences where we didn't feel seen, accepted, or understood, where we felt unlovable or like we didn't belong. And we'll address these inner parts more in other videos, but for now, just to note that rushing with a perpetual sense of urgency that's disproportional to the actual circumstance of the moment in the present is often a protective strategy showing up that becomes a well-worn, reflexive, and generally unnecessary in our adult life habit. So like in the personal example I shared, the reason I couldn't just shift the rushing pattern initially, even when I wanted to, was because the roots of that pattern were deeply protective and had been rooted into my foundation from a really young age. So when a protective part like this takes over our logical adult self, we can't just wrench the steering wheel out of its hands or convince it to stop pushing us in this way through logic. We need to work with these parts in a really gentle, curious, kind, consistent, warm, attentive way. So once we're aware of it, how do we work with this rushing pattern and these urgency addicted parts? The first step, as always, with pattern change is tuning in with clear-eyed, mindful awareness to really notice the existing pattern. Don't even worry about trying to shift anything in your behavior yet. Just start to notice. How does this pattern show up in your days of rushing? What do you do? How do you behave when the sense of urgency kicks in? How does your body feel when you're rushing? What thoughts run through your mind when that rushing mode stirs up? And then start to get curious about the pattern. What intended purpose does this rushing pattern serve? Remembering that our system doesn't repeat any pattern, much less for decades, unless there's some intended purpose toward our survival. What parts of you feel like they're at the wheel when this excessive rushing mode kicks in? What do those protective parts fear might happen if they stopped making you believe everything was urgent? What's your sense of how old these parts were when they were created? And what are those scared parts of you needing in order to feel reassured that they're actually safe now? Because that's the thing. In order for a present-day protective pattern to soften, our young, scared, vulnerable parts have to trust that it's safe for them to stop guarding us in the same way they always have. Until those pushing parts believe, through consistently felt, somatically proven experience, that you can stay safe and productive without them bracing and pushing in the same old ways, they will not let go of their tight grip on the wheel. But once some new trust starts to build between the protective old or young part and our aware adult present day self, then we can start to slowly introduce some gradual shifts in behavior. So for me in this case, that looked like getting grounded and connected within myself through some nervous system regulating practices first thing in the morning. And then anchoring even more into those practices in the moment as I felt that rushing energy start to rise, start to surge. And we'll get into some of those regulating practices in more detail in some other videos. And then pausing. This is imperative when it comes to rewiring any habit. Pausing, feeling your feet on the ground, taking some conscious deep belly breaths, and literally just slowing down before reacting in the old reflexive way. And just to note, this will likely feel extremely uncomfortable at first if this is a strong, really old pattern like this rushing pattern has been for me. It will become vastly less uncomfortable relatively soon if you keep practicing. And I would also remind myself in those moments, even though this feels urgent, we're actually safe here right now. We have to update our brain and nervous system to the fact that we're not in the same old, unsafe, or under-resourced circumstance, and that we're actually resourced and capable to handle this present moment in a new way now in the present. And then on a practical, strategic note, in my case, I initiated some conscious conversations with my daughter when we were both feeling calm, where I asked her if she'd noticed that our morning routine had been leaving us both feeling kind of bad. And I asked her for some ideas about ways we could smooth things out and work more as a team together in the mornings. She suggested some ways that she could be more responsible for her own timing, her own process, including asking to know where on the clock the long hand should be when she transitioned from brushing her teeth to getting her clothes on, that kind of thing. And she's really followed through on her end of the bargain with that, which has really helped to let my urgency and reactive parts relax that control. And our morning dynamic, it didn't change dramatically overnight, but I have to say that now that pushing, rushy energy almost never arises within me on school mornings anymore. Honestly, it feels like magic. It's like that on switch that I used to not be able to turn off just got deactivated. Like it's just not a hot button within me anymore. And now mornings genuinely feel easeful and harmonious almost all the time. And that's not to say that I don't still have this old rushing conditioning show up occasionally elsewhere in my life. But after having worked so intentionally and consistently with how it manifested in this one slice of my life, the softening extended into other areas of my life as well. And I find that old reflexive urgency trigger to be hugely lessened across virtually all areas of my life. I offer that as a note of optimism, I hope, for you, in case this kind of work might be feeling like a lot of work, because it is. But you can start to unravel unhelpful old patterns like this anywhere it feels up in your life, and it will impact other areas of your life too. So you don't have to work on it this intensively everywhere necessarily. Those shifts will organically happen once you've done the heavy lift in one hot spot. So as we bring warm, consistent awareness to these urgency-driven, rushing parts within us, once we really get to know them in a genuinely curious way, pretty miraculous shifts are absolutely able to occur over time. But this is, as always, a gentle, gradual, cumulative process. Don't expect a decades-long, deeply entrenched pattern of rushing to magically melt away overnight. And don't be surprised when some resistant parts rise up in response to your intentions to slow things down even a little bit. The way forward is through gentle but steady, consistent awareness and micro shifts, moment after moment after moment after moment in just your average days. And the more you get in the habit of gently dialing down the rushing habit in low stakes places throughout your days, the easier it will over time be to work that muscle in hotter, heavier moments. So a few ideas of places you might practice slowing down or moving more gently this week. This can be while putting on face lotion, while making your bed, brushing your teeth, putting on your shoes, doing dishes, eating, soaping and shampooing yourself in the shower, pausing before immediately responding to every text that comes through, typing more slowly, gently when you actually have plenty of time to get that email out. Maybe while walking, noticing when your pace is hyperspeed, even when you actually have no deadline for where you need to be. And so you might just pay some gentle attention this week as you move through your days to just notice, when am I rushing when I don't need to? And how does that rushing feel in my body? What's this rushing energy trying to do for me? And what might happen if things slowed down just a notch or two? Stay curious and enjoy the exploration.